This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. Hi. What do you guys want to talk about? This is such good shit. Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Hi. I can't do it. I've now come to terms. I cannot do a good Tony Khan impersonation. I don't know what it is. I can't muster up the ability to be that awkward. I've tried. But, yeah, there are just some people I cannot imitate well. Tony Khan is one of those people. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, I guess. Well, that was a lovely start. Hopefully it's a strong Monday show, because, well, what fun would a weak podcast be, am I right? And we all know when we're talking about Retro Raw and modern-day SmackDown, weak is a very fitting word to describe a lot of those shows. God, with Friday Night SmackDown, I don't even know if weak was fitting enough. That show sucked. Like, even per SmackDown standards, that show was just egregiously awful. Am I the only one? Like, it actually made Retro Raw passable by comparison. And Lord knows that show was anything to write home about. I mean, we'll get into SmackDown later on. I was half tempted to actually start with that, seeing as how these Retro Raws usually end up being the worst of the three review segments. Like, I try to do that methodically so I can get most of the bad stuff out of the way first and then save the good material for later on. But, yeah, that SmackDown booking this week did not help their case any. Before we dive into all that, make sure you guys subscribe, comment, like the show. I saw a pretty big boost in viewership for that Starrcade 87 review the other week. Glad to see that attracted some fresh eyeballs. I encourage you to do the same if you have not seen the Survivor Series recaps we did. I mean, I thought those turned out to be better than the Starrcade review, honestly. Then again, I don't really understand what triggers the YouTube algorithms anymore. I really don't, dude. I mean, one day it'll look like they actually try to promote my work on YouTube. Other days, it looks like a concerted effort on their part to thwart my progress. It's kind of why I use Rumble as a backup option, since I know YouTube's no longer the be-all, end-all of video platform streaming. I guess there are other options out there too, but I don't know. Rumble seems to be the go-to these days. Whatever happened to Dailymotion? The YouTube alternatives. Is Vimeo still around? I used to watch some stuff on Vimeo. Good times. Going back in the time machine when things were much simpler. You know what wasn't simple was Retro Raw. It was simply something. It was simply not good. Still probably not as bad as SmackDown, but they were pretty neck and neck there this week. And a lot's happened in the world of the World Wrestling Federation since Survivor Series 94. From the time that show ended to the following Monday, under a week, There have now been 3 World Wrestling Federation champions. We've gone from Bret Hart to Bob Backlund to, God help us all, the now reigning and defending WWF champion, Diesel. So it's been quite the eventful several days. And the real question of it all, how did we get here? Oh, it's actually a good question. In the literal sense, the answer is 8 seconds, MSG house show, jackknife powerbomb, Lol Diesel wins. The expansive insider reply, that I'm not so sure of. It's one of the most fascinating tales in WWF history that I don't think ever gets a real extent of explanation. What led to the last-minute decision? Why swap the belt over to Backlund just to have him be a transitional champion to Diesel? Couldn't you have just used Bret for that spot? Seems like a lot of unnecessary hot potatoing. They're all good questions. Perfectly rational, perfectly valid. And I still kind of hold true that I think the short and simple reason is Vince didn't want Bret losing clean to Diesel. Since Diesel technically turned babyface at the pay-per-view and did the whole split from Shawn, I think he just didn't want to beat Bret in that manner. Which is respectable, I guess. Shows that Vince saw enough monetary value in Bret to where he didn't want to completely diminish his appeal on the card. But, yeah, that MSG footage is something else. It's so brief and terse, like they can literally air the full video and it would still only be about 15 seconds of airtime, including the celebration. But just like that, we've now entered the reign of the Kevin Nash era, where the only person salivating to see it happening was Vincent K. McMahon himself. The rest of us were groaning and rolling our eyes. But don't worry. It was only a mere 12 months, give or take. And people still give Bradshaw shit for his WWE title reign. At least he had some good matches when he was the champion. But getting off the subject of Nash for a minute, we go to the ring for our opening bout this week. Owen Hart versus John Paul. And his invisible partner, George Ringo. Owen, by the way, who was coming off his best performance in wrestling in the entire year of 1994, and that slime ball move to conspire to get the belt off of Bret at Survivor Series, the best work in wrestling history since the Montreal Screwjob. So naturally, he's on cloud 9 this week, as he goes in there and wipes the floor with his job guy. Now, the bigger takeaway was having Bret on the phone to sort of recount the incident, to get his side of the story. And he recounted in only the way Bret Hart knows how, lulling people into a coma with his monotone ums and uhs and other various psychobabble. The best part of it was when Vince asked him how he was feeling, and Bret goes, "Gotta be honest, after that stunt Owen pulled, I'm just kind of stressed about the whole thing." Of course, we had Lawler on color commentary this week, so just like the great heel he was, he butts in with, "Did he say stretched?" Obviously poking fun at the fact that he was basically laying on the mat in a chicken wing for almost 10 minutes. A little bit of fun jesting in there from Lawler, but it's pretty basic stuff. 0-1 with a sharpshooter. And Brett promised he would watch the footage back during the encore presentation. Try to figure out what his next step is from here. Oh yeah, and Lawler says hi to Brett's mom. Because, you know, there's still that bad blood. All things being equal, it was a pretty good start to the show per Raw standards. And then it was very quickly back into the cesspool from there. Because again, keep in mind, this is WWF Raw from the mid-90s. So even when you get something relatively good, such as Owen Hart, it's quickly ruined by all the other stuff happening on the show. Most of it being crap. Take, for example, the next match on the card. Adam Bomb versus IRS, who came out to the ring accompanied by a druid. Because for reasons that have still been completely unexplained, Rotunda is mad that The Undertaker didn't file taxes for all the bodies he made grave sites for. Because wrestling is fucking stupid and corny, you see. He told Taker that he will not rest in peace until he pays IRS his taxes. And that was only stupid compared to how awful the match was. Whoever in their right mind decided, let's give Brian Clark and Mike Rotunda 7 minutes plus commercial. I hope that motherfucker was fired on the spot. It's the most boring match of the 90s. Half the match was spent with IRS continually throwing Adam Bomb out to the floor. They did a near fall sequence as a commercial pitch where Adam Bomb was literally in the middle of a pin as they cut away. Then they come back and show IRS kicking out, which was stupid because, duh. The match was still going on when they came back. Did they think we'd figured it was 2 out of 3 falls? So finally, after another 5 minutes of IRS cheating behind Hebner's back, the finish is Adam Bomb going up top but getting thwarted by the mystery druid. He takes a flip bump back into the ring, and then IRS climbed on top of him and pinned him. And as the heels kept trying to beat down Adam, here comes Lex Luger to make the save. Still booked in the middle of this mid-card purgatory with the corporation. Coming off that pay-per-view less than a week prior where he lost the match for his team. And they're still trying to salvage his career. It's amazing to think we've got another year of this before he finally leaves for WCW. So then we come back to the booth after break, where Vince, with a straight face, informs us of the following. What happened to Jerry Lawler at Survivor Series with Doink and the Minis was the funniest thing in WWF history. No, it wasn't. You know what else wasn't funny? Was Sparkplug Bob Holly versus Tony DeVito. It also wasn't good. Both the match and the commentary. I swear to God, by the time this segment was over, keep in mind, the entire match probably went like 2.5, maybe 3 minutes at the most. I don't think I have ever heard the words snowball and or derby uttered more times than in this one fucking segment. Every other sentence, the commentators are talking about Sparkplug Bob Holly entering the Snowball Derby. Snowball Derby's coming up this weekend, folks. Get it on your calendar. Snowball Derby. You don't want to miss it. I was like, would you please shut the fuck up with the Snowball Derby shit? Nobody cares. Frosty the Snowman couldn't give 2 flying fucks about the Snowball Derby. By the way, when I said the match wasn't good, when Tony DeVito was actually getting the heat on Bob Holly for 90 seconds of the 3-minute match, what else do you expect? His career was doomed. From the moment they said, Bob, go sell for Tony DeVito for a few minutes. That was it. Hang up the boots. Go back to Smoky Mountain. Holly won with something. I don't even remember. I think he did a diving clothesline. I wasn't paying attention. I was just sulking in the misery that was the vignette for Henry O. Godwin. Because if there's one thing that WWF desperately needed, now that we're coming up on some of those rotten moments of the 90s, what we really needed to add to the rot of this ongoing product was a pig farmer gimmick. Fucking hell, Vince. Poop, farts, burps, slop. Vince was what? Late 40s at the time? And he still had a fetish for shit jokes. Unreal. Yes, Henry O. Godwin is coming to the WWF. I'll let you try to figure out what the abbreviations stand for. Shouldn't take you long to figure it out. It's like when Vince Russo booked the Sports Entertainment Extreme in TNA. Or even better, Total Nonstop Action. That joke's written itself for decades. And only now in 2023 did they finally realize that Impact Wrestling was such in dire condition. Hey, let's bring back TNA Wrestling. What could go wrong? Part of me wishes I was watching TNA right about now. Because it would sure bring me more pleasure and excitement than watching Lex Luger versus Bert Santino. Even Lawler burying Santino for the entire 2-minute period still wasn't enough to get me remotely interested. The only thing I noted was the ending where Luger struggled to get this rotund garden gnome up onto his shoulders for the rack. There are very few people I have seen Luger legitimately struggle to get up onto his shoulders for the rack. Funny enough, one of them was an NWA jobber we saw recently where Luger legitimately dropped the guy right on his neck and almost killed him. The other was Bert Santino. Oh, and it should be noted, when Luger won, 0 reaction. Even with all that pyro and fanfare they gave him, there was like a 10-second USA chant, which very quickly died out. And all the people just stopped caring. Hey, you know what might have helped prevent that reaction? Having Luger win at the fucking pay-per-view. Just saying. So then we come back for Babyface Diesel. His first real babyface promo in any major capacity since the Shawn angle. My God, dude. It's still weird to think about. But it never gets any easier. Babyface Kevin Nash. Phonier than a fucking football bat, dude. And that's really the unfortunate thing about the whole segment, because if you remove the smart fan of me talking, the bulk of the promo wasn't bad. I just didn't buy a word of it because I don't buy Kevin Nash as a white meat babyface. Nor did I ever buy it. Now, to be fair, they covered a lot of ground here, and it was pretty much explained that because of the babyface injury to Brett, he was taken out of the MSG match and then replaced with Diesel as Backlund's opponent. And also, since Shawn and Diesel were no longer recognized as the WWF Tag Team Champions, apparently in an off-camera angle where Shawn threw his half of the tag belts in the trash can, so those belts were vacated and then held up. And there's a lot of moving parts to this, and as they're going through and explaining it, the one thought that kept hitting me, how much of this stuff was very much unplanned? From Diesel winning the title in the manner he did, to Shawn and Diesel splitting off and relinquishing the tag belts off camera, to Diesel turning into the most generic corporate Vince McMahon version of a babyface you could possibly get. I'm almost underselling it by calling it a white meat babyface push. I mean, this guy's pushing John Cena levels of unbearable. And it's only been a week. Took me a few years to kind of turn on John Cena, but it ain't taking Kevin Nash long. Nor did it take me long as a kid. You just listen to him in this promo, and you could tell Nash really wasn't into what he was saying. He's trying to be respectful and promise to be a fighting champion, blah, blah. But because we all know the reputation Nash had, like, you watch it back now and you're like, what planet did they think we were living on? There was nothing remotely believable or genuine about any of this. Diesel was putting on an act. All the smart fans knew it. Even Vince, I think, deep down really knew it. It was totally ridiculous. You never thought for a second Nash actually bought into the words he was saying. He was just reciting verbiage and doing what Vince told him to do. You're a good guy now, pal. Act the part. I mean, he gave it the old college try, but boy, did it backfire. They're just certain guys throughout the history of this sport that you look at and you're like, that guy never worked the other way around. Diesel, Kevin Nash is a heel. Major success. Diesel, Kevin Nash is a babyface. Absolute death television. Even when he was in WCW, like, remember there was a period in the late 90s where he was on top as a champion or something? Weren't they trying to force him on TV as a good guy, and it was just totally ridiculous? Ugh. I mean, in this case, I would say it was even more intolerable because even when Kevin Nash was acting like a good guy in Nitro, at least he was trying to be the cool guy. This isn't even cool Kevin Nash. This is, again, his corporate babyface version of what Vince saw. The happy poster boy for the company. That's what they try to make him out to be. And boy, did it fail. But get ready for more of it, because it doesn't get any easier to stomach from here on out. So then we had the Heavenly Bodies versus Gary Scott and Buck Quartermain in the We Have 5 minutes of TV time to burn match. By the way, yes, his last name was indeed Quartermain. I cocked my head sideways too. And that was more or less placeholder material, so Mr. Backlund could come out on commentary to educate us with some more cutting-edge English-speaking tongue. He admonished everybody in the crowd for not having a dictionary in their back pocket. He also informed us that he plans on slapping the chicken wing hold on Diesel and, quote, exterminate him from the WWF like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. Now, that's one way to put it. The dinosaurs were definitely exterminated by this point. So it is a fair simile. By the way, the crowd did not give two shits about this match. Dr. Tom and Gigolo are having this totally out-of-place Southern-style territory match in the middle of a Raw. Crowd just sitting there completely stone-faced. Now I know why Jim hated the New York area so much. Because he's right. These WWF fans just did not get pro wrestling. They knew sports entertainment, and that was about it. Didn't give two flying fucks about the moves. They just saw underneath star power and said, We don't care. And that's not even a knock on Tom and Jimmy, but like, I mean, let's be fair. They weren't Brett, Shawn, or Taker in terms of star power. And I've always talked about how I never thought Dr. Tom and Jimmy Del Rey really worked well in the WWF. They never had suitable opponents, maybe outside the Steiner brothers. And even that SummerSlam match on the previous year wasn't anything to write home about. They're never involved in anything important. You know, unless Vince needs a set of credible heels for a babyface tag team to go after. More often than not, the bodies end up doing the job. Meanwhile, there's poor Jim Cornette on the floor trying to be a heat magnet and utterly failing on every account. I mean, it must have been frustrating for him, because while he's also trying to run Smoky Mountain simultaneously, here he is on a taped Raw in the middle of Poughkeepsie, New York, in front of a dead crowd. I'm sure he was over it too. He didn't want to be there. So after the bodies won, Backlund stormed off in a feat of rage after they re-aired the MSG footage one more time. Backlund promised that before he retires, he would slap the chicken wing hold on Vince McMahon. To which Vince casually notes, "Well, let's hope that doesn't happen." Very subtle response. But, yeah, this show mostly blew a cock. Diesel has already killed the crowd immensely with his dead-in-the-water babyface promos. Oh, God, I mean, at this point, I'm half expecting him to come out next week and do a Suffer and Succotash promo. That's when we know the guy's push is doomed. But that's basically what we're left with at the top of the card. While Brett's out selling the injury, Backlund's hanging around doing his thing. Owen's still kind of the misfit in the upper card role. Shawn is still being elevated, but he's not there yet. And fucking Diesel is the WWF Champion. That about says it all right there. Diesel, the World Wrestling Federation Champion. I'm already over it, and it's not even a week. And then there's SmackDown. Bad news. No Punk. Which is like the only reason I tuned in to watch this week. Was to see if we'd get another Punk cameo. Took the time to watch that Raw promo he did on Monday. It was a very interesting 8 minutes. I was kind of wondering if they would take the opportunity to have him show up on SmackDown and maybe elaborate a little bit on what he said. Instead, we got the Viper and other assorted drivel. So, guess we all have to make sacrifices somewhere. I'll talk about Randy Orton at the end. I mean, his segment at least had a handful of important takeaways. But I'm just going to let you know now, I'm not going to spend another half hour trying to rant and rave about how horrible the rest of the show was. Quite frankly, if WWE is not going to bother trying, why should I? To say they were on autopilot mode when putting the show together, that would probably be giving them too much credit. It's mind-boggling. They couldn't give us 5 minutes of Punk on the show. God forbid they actually try to get the people engaged from the onset. No, instead, right at the top of the hour, they immediately take the piss out of the room by starting with a girls segment. And a brutal one at that. Because God, did this segment suck a wet cock. So by the time we were 8 minutes in, I had already given up trying. And like, I mean, above all else, here's my question. remove any personal opinions or takes I might have on the way they feature the women's division in WWE. I'll try to be objective about it here. Did we not just see a fucking War Games match on the premium live event with every single one of the girls involved in this very segment? Where more importantly, the baby faces won. Why the fuck is any of this still going on? Why is Damage Control still beefing with Shotzi, Charlotte, and Bianca? I don't give a fuck who wants the title shot against Io. The faction warfare shit should be done. Finished. Kaput. We've seen the blow-off. We don't need to see the same group of girls fighting anymore. Nobody wanted to see it to begin with. Move on. Especially not the sloppy one these chicks were engaging in. Christ, I've seen backyarders put on more convincing-looking fights. This had to have been one of the worst TV segments on any wrestling show all year. First of all, they were in Brooklyn. So because it's WWE, they have to try to have the heels get the cheap heat reactions. Going out there and burying the fans and talking about how the city smells. And like, no one's fucking reacting to anything. Dakota Kai comes out and she's like, Bianca, you may be great at getting these people to cheer for you. Meanwhile, it's so quiet in the venue you can hear mice pissing in the rafters. The whole thing's death television. Finally, at the point Shotzi and Charlotte come out and start brawling with Damage Control, not only is it the worst brawl I've ever seen, I'm not kidding you. Shotzi and Kairi were in the corner at one point, not even throwing wort windmill punches. I can't even begin to describe what this looked like. It looked like two drunk girls going at each other with no depth perception. Just the worst fake fight you've ever seen. Nobody in the crowd cared. Terrible start to the show. And of course, the payoff. What was it all designed to set up? On this show, of all matches, the epitome of drawing names out of a hat, Bianca Belair versus Kairi Sane. Okay. I will give anybody $20 right now to go back and watch that footage. Tell me that Bianca and Kairi ever touched a single time during that brawl. They had the entire fucking women's locker room out there in this wretched fight to set up a match between two girls who I'm not even sure came to blows at any point. Wow. Yeah, a lot of thought went into that one. I can also say the same for Bobby Lashley versus Butch. In addition to more crowd indifference. Probably because it's Butch versus Lashley, so why the fuck would you care? The match is boring as all get out. Lashley won with a spear from out of the corner. That was my collective amount of effort I put into writing notes about this match. Oh yeah, and I guess the Brawling Brutes are no longer a thing. Why? Quite frankly, I don't care. Nor do I care about Butch feuding with the suspect sissies. Whoops, I mean Pretty Dreadly. Same thing. You could see how it would get those confused. So then Santos Escobar beat Joaquin Wilde. Probably the first time we've seen Wilde in a singles match on the main roster. But the finish was never in doubt here. The biggest problem was that even with Escobar predictably going over, they still had to have him sell for like 70% of the match. And like, I don't know. I mean, I get the idea of not wanting to totally undercut the guy, but when the fuck has Joaquin Wilde ever done anything constructive on the main roster except stand in the background of the LWO and do nothing? Did you really need to protect him here? He's been a geek since day one. Just have Escobar squash the guy in 2 minutes. Like, letting Wilde have a momentary bit of shine, it's not going to make him any more or less over with the crowd. Certainly not in Brooklyn, where half the fucking people were asleep at the wheel anyway. I bet you most people were filing out for the concession stands during this segment. I mean, I can tell you they didn't miss much. They also had Dragon Lee run out at the very end, so apparently that feud's going to continue. And that all led to the Logan Paul segment, where I officially noted to myself, we are 45 minutes into the program, and I've had jack shit to talk about. Like, I was literally trying to come up with anything to talk about with the previous few segments, just because of how one-dimensional and uninspiring they were. And while I wouldn't really call this segment great by any means, at least they were attempting to move some story stuff along here. So Logan Paul's out there being Logan Paul. As I've said numerous times, he's a natural heel on camera. Super extroverted guy. He's got that punchable douche nozzle face. You know, he's joking about how he's only as good of a U.S. champion as his challengers are. And since Rhea's on the shelf recovering from knee surgery, and that rematch can't happen anytime soon, Logan went to Nick Aldis personally to have him book an 8-man tournament to find out who Logan's going to feud with next. And of course, upon immediate viewing of the talent pool that's going to be a part of this thing, the only name that was striking to me on paper is the giant question mark guy, because apparently that's going to be an NXT call-up. One can only hope it's someone like a Braun Breaker, but you never know. Could be Joe Gacy. The rest of them I just kind of shrugged at, mostly because none of them were LA Knight. And if you're wondering to yourself, okay, it's a tournament, so surely they at least bothered to show some brackets to let us know who's going to be competing against whom, right? Right? Well, no. No, they didn't do that. They just kind of flashed all the names up on screen and said, here's your tournament members. And of course, in round one, the first match in the series, Kevin Owens versus Grayson fucking Fodder. So already we're off to a wonderful start. They're still trying to make this ham and egg jabroni a fucking somebody when he's always been and will continue to be a nobody. And no one can ever change that. Owens is out there wrestling a guy that looks like the local Walmart greeter. No body, no muscle tone. The most generic ring gear you can possibly imagine. And Kevin Owens isn't a Greek god himself, but next to this guy, he at least looks like somebody. And meanwhile, the biggest disaster of it all, there's poor Austin Theory. And what is he doing? He's playing cheerleader, standing at ringside like a total dweeb. Like, this is so mind-boggling to wrap my head around. How do you look at these two as a pairing and decide Grayson Fodder's the guy we need to put the focus on? Never mind that good-looking, charismatic kid next to him with the good body and the superstar look. You know, the one that can actually cut a halfway decent promo. The one that used to be somebody that we valued as a top guy. Now all of a sudden he's just a mid-card geek. You know, I know this is probably not the proper time to come to the defense of Vince McMahon's booking, but, the one thing you can say, when Vince was in charge, you know who was all over this show getting properly spotlighted? Austin fucking Theory. Let that sink in. And wasn't he supposed to be one of Hunter's boys? What happened to that? I mean, the match was whatever. They had fodder work over Owen's hand for an injury angle they did earlier. And then, of course, at the end, fodder goes to trap his hand in the turnbuckle pad. And then Owen sidesteps him and rolls him up for the 3 count. I mean, it's kind of apparent where this is all going. Out of everyone in the tournament, Kevin Owens is the obvious first choice to win. I don't actually expect him to beat Logan Paul for the title. But, that could be a relatively decent filler feud. Especially if they let those guys do some promo work on each other. But the only thing I really got out of it was Kevin Owens advances in a tournament with no brackets. Set to face a round 2 opponent that has not been determined yet, since the quarterfinal rounds also have not been determined. So already this is the worst tournament of all time. And, I think this is where they re-aired that Punk footage from the promo he did on Raw, which was low-key the best thing on SmackDown the entire week. And it was a fucking replay. The good thing to come out of it was that we did get confirmation here. Punk will be on SmackDown next week. So good. Hopefully that'll make up for the abomination that was this week's program. Now, for the record, if you would like my thoughts on the promo itself, since I don't review Raw, I'll share a quick bit of insight here, because I watched it. Hard to really gauge what I thought of the material necessarily, because, there's only so much you can cover in an 8-minute window. A guy like Punk could have had quite literally the entire hour to speak, and I still don't think he would have covered all his tracks. From what he said, it was a pretty cut and dry return speech. He didn't directly name opponents or call anybody out explicitly. Didn't really get shady with the underhanded remarks or anything like that. He wasn't shooting on AEW or Tony Khan's lack of leadership. He just talked about the fact that he's home. Took him a long time to come to grips with the reality that WWE is and will always be his home. And now that he's back, he's here to make a lot of money. And not friends. Which, I guess you could chalk that up to a small pot shot at the Beta Bucks. But I think people are reading way too into that. I saw people going ballistic online about that comment. Yeah, there was some underlying message somewhere in there, but I would encourage you not to overthink it too much. It wasn't really a babyface or a heel promo. I know the big program they're teasing right now is him and Rollins. Not sure if they're going to save that for Mania season in April next year, or if they might try to blow it off earlier, say around Rumble season. Either way, it's CM Punk. We all know from the AEW experience, you put a live mic in the guy's hand, he knows how to command attention in the room. No matter what the circumstance was, in AEW especially, when that guy was on camera, he had your eyes glued, whether you were a hater or a lover, because you just never knew what to expect. And that'll be the big selling point for the promo in Rhode Island next Friday. What the fuck is the guy going to say or do? What's his agenda? Is he going to call somebody out? Is he going to remain a free agent for the time being and not sign an exclusive deal to Raw or SmackDown? I like the fact that they're not in a rush to blow that off or sign him to a particular brand. Like, Punk's the perfect kind of talent that you can bounce back between both shows just because you can buy that the guy would tell Aldis and Pierce to fuck off if they try to make him sign an exclusive deal. So there's a lot of mystery to what's going on here, what Punk's next move is going to be. And as long as they keep that illusion going, it's going to garner eyeballs. So let's see if he expands on that Raw promo from Monday night. We'll see if he gets a little more personal now. I mean, he's going to be on SmackDown, so you know the bloodline is going to be looming. And if there's one thing we know all too well about, it's the history between CM Punk and Paul Heyman. That was another subtle reference to his Raw promo that I neglected to mention. The nod to the wise man, where Punk said, "A wise man told me that in order to be fulfilled, you might have to walk away from all this and come back later on once you get your passion back." That's exactly what Punk did for almost 10 years. He walked away from the WWE. But he never forgot those words from Paul E. So, yeah. A lot of interesting stuff on the horizon. And we'll see how they connect the dots later on. If they're ever looking for some interesting plot twist to make the bloodline interesting again, the wise man turning on Roman and siding with CM Punk. Now that's something that people will be talking about, for good or bad. But as we rub our hands together, awaiting that evident pipe bomb, now let's go ahead and delve back into reality for a minute here. Because I guess we have more stuff to cover on this stupid program. Bianca Belair had her match with Kairi Sane, which Bianca won with the KOD. I'd have stuck around to watch it, but, you know, duty calls. As I currently point to my invisible watch that none of you can see because this is an audio podcast, let's just say I had to take a piss. A very long piss. So I missed the bulk of it. But I'm sure it was a great match. But anyway, I think we've wasted enough time talking about the crap on this show. Let's get to the final segment. The Randy Orton saga. All throughout the show, Nick Aldis kept promising that he was going to sign Orton to an exclusive SmackDown deal. And well, somehow along the way, Adam Pearce caught wind of this, so he had his lawyers drum up a Raw contract so he could fly to SmackDown and basically threaten to do the same thing. And for whatever reason, Nick Aldis allowed this. He didn't just boot Adam Pearce out of the building and tell him, "Fuck you, this is my show, get out of here." No, he just let him in. Well, I mean, to be fair, he did sort of tell Pearce to fuck off when Orton came out and they were trying to do their hard sell pitch. "Randy, come over to Raw. I will give you the winner of Seth Rollins and Jey Uso for the Bronze Tier World title." And Aldis was like, "This is my show, dude. Let me get my piece in first." But, well, the long and short of it, Orton was on the fence. That was until Paul Heyman came down to stir the pot. And he's basically warning Randy that it's safer to go over to Raw. Because if he stays on SmackDown, he's going to be continually hunted by Roman and the Bloodline. Which naturally brings down Solo and Jimmy to try to kickstart the fight with Randy. And that goes on for about a minute. Until LA Knight, runs down to send Solo packing. Oh, by the way, huge pop for LA Knight. Probably even more electric than Orton's ovation he got. So I cannot entirely say the crowd was dead throughout the whole show, because even LA Knight managed to spark some life and energy out of these robotic Brooklyn bodies. So, now after Knight fights off with Solo, Orton drops Jimmy with the DDT and the RKO, at which point he grabs both the contracts, contemplates it for another minute. Paulie's great on the floor going, "Go to Raw, Randy! You're safer there!" And predictably, Orton signs the SmackDown contract, to the shock of virtually no one. What was shocking was Orton dropping Nick Aldis with the RKO, which, well, one of two things will happen as a result. It'll either get glossed over entirely by next week, or Randy will get a slap on the wrist, maybe a small fine thrown at him, and then they'll just move on like nothing ever happened. I mean, the RKO to Aldis got a pop, but, admittedly, it was kind of stupid. Like, this isn't a Steve Austin, Vince McMahon type angle where the people were actually craving to see the manager / authority figure get his comeuppance. Is Nick Aldis supposed to even be a heel? I thought he was supposed to be a babyface authority figure. I mean, yeah, he's buttoned down and pretty serious, but he hasn't been conspiring to fuck over the babyfaces. So I didn't really get that at all. I mean, if the guy wants to save his credibility, he's going to have to put his foot down there, because the way this all played out, Orton was just kind of being a dick for no reason. So I probably could have done without that. Although it was kind of funny, admittedly. But Orton's on SmackDown now, so okay, fine. Gives the Bloodline something to do in the interim. I mean, I thought they were still working on the Roman Reigns LA Knight rematch, but I guess they're looking to introduce Orton into the equation as the final stop before Mania season in the spring. If that winds up being the title match in January, that's fine. I mean, it does have storyline significance from when the Bloodline took out Orton over a year ago, so I'm all right with it. Kind of goes to show the state of WWE's product right now. Never thought the day would come that I would actually be looking forward to a Randy Orton feud. Punk's right. Hell really has frozen over. So there you go. That was SmackDown. 10 minutes of a decent main event, preceded by about 50 minutes of dreck. I mean, this was the equivalent of phoning it in for the night. Not even trying to book a television show to generate attention. They just said, let's book the most uninspiring card we can possibly come up with and see if we don't run the people off in spades by the end. Sounds like Dynamite to me. But yeah, this show sucked. Not gonna lie. By the time we got to the final segment, I was on the brink of falling asleep. I was so bored. Like, after seeing the show, how could you not? If you even watched the entire thing, I can't imagine people were that stupid like me to do that. I mean, the problem is when you save your entire collection of star power for the final segment and you put all the underneath schlubs on like 2/3 of the show, what do you think was going to happen? Plus, you had the girls curtain jerking the program again. That's a big problem right there. It was lousy. I don't know what else there is to say. We'll just hope that with Punk coming in next Friday, it'll give us something worth talking about in greater detail. But for now, we'll move on with the final segment of today's Monday show. The NXT report. And they definitely came in locked and loaded this week. Obviously stemming from the TV main event from 1 week ago. We now know that Bo Dallas will be facing Adrian Neville for the NXT Championship this week. We will talk about that match later on in the program. But if you also recall, one of the questions I left at the end of last week's program, what did they have in store for Sami Zayn? Well, I think we may have gotten our answer this week. I had actually forgotten about this little feud until they sort of reintroduced it here as a teaser. Then I remembered, oh yeah, those guys had a series of matches that got super rave reviews from a lot of the internet fans in 2014. And I'm talking about the Sami Zayn Cesaro program for anybody that doesn't remember their NXT history all that well. Which is kind of bizarre too, because 1 week ago, they were teasing something with Cesaro and Regal, and they had one of those NXT exclusive packages here where some mystery camera guy was asking for commentary on the Regal conflict. And while Cesaro's talking about that, in walks Leo Kruger, trying to pitch to Cesaro why he should be an honorary member of the Real Americans, even though I'm pretty sure Kruger was like from South Africa or something. But the long and short of it, Cesaro said that he was going to talk to Dutch Mantel, try to get Kruger a spot in the group. But first he has to do something to Sami Zayn. He did not make it evidently clear what that thing was. I presume beat him in a professional wrestling match. Not sure why the secrecy was needed, but, well, there you go. Leo Kruger is still a thing. It's basically what I got out of it. And then we go to the ring for Paige versus Natalya. NXT Women's title on the line here. With sparkling, glittery graphics and all. Also, we have now officially witnessed the worst ring announcer WWE ever hired. I had no idea who this chick was. Never saw her once before in my life. She was incredibly hot. Had a great rack. Fucking rotten ring announcer. She had that Valley Girl thing going on. It was an immediate turnoff. Of course, by the time the girls actually started wrestling each other, then I kept asking, can we go back to seeing the pretty brunette with the rack? I think I'd rather look at that. I'm only partially kidding. I mean, the match itself wasn't that bad. Apparently, the drama here stemmed from material that was happening on Total Divas. Wasn't that the fake reality show they were doing that ran like 3 or 4 seasons and then died a horrible death in the ratings every time it aired? Isn't that how the Bella Sluts kind of got famous? So it would seem they were using TV reality show feuds to carry over onto the wrestling product. Riveting. By the way, who the fuck was the babyface and the heel here? Natty comes out smiling and acting all buddy-buddy with the fans. Paige, I always thought just naturally had resting bitch face to begin with. So she was kind of always a heel in my book, even when we were supposed to cheer her. But then as the match keeps going, they start having Natalya act more heelish, while Paige was sort of working as the babyface in peril. I don't really know what was going on here. There was some okay technical stuff early on. I guess theoretically, neither of these girls were outright heels, so they weren't really having a traditional good guy, bad guy match. They did say that during the break spot, Natty had slapped Paige in the face or something, right when she went for a handshake. Would have been nice if we actually got to see that happen. Unless the announcers were just lying about it. In that case, they all should have been kicked in the nuts. And eventually they do the deal where after they connect with each other with flying cross bodies, Natty starts making a comeback on Paige. She ends up trapping her in the sharpshooter hold. And Paige reverses it by flipping Natty headfirst into the turnbuckle. And that led to a very weird finishing sequence where both girls were struggling to get to their feet. And right as Natty goes to grab Paige, she immediately gets caught with a page turner and pinned. What has to be one of the dumbest moves I've ever seen. The page turner. I don't even know what the hell it's supposed to be. It's like she grabs the girl like she's going for a neck breaker, but instead of just turning her over and then swinging around to take a back bump, she has to do like a semi-cartwheel while she has to hold on to the other girl. Then they basically take a cartwheel bump. It looks so overly convoluted. But, yeah, Paige retains. Okay, cool. Whatever. I like Natty. Never had a problem with her. I still never got the hype of Paige, Saraya, whatever she's going by these days. I probably never will. I mean, I don't really see the appeal in chicks that look like Dracula's long-lost sister, where they're so pale the reflection of the ring lights against their bodies is enough to blind you. But whatever. Some people, I guess, dig the anti-sunlight look. Not for me, big dog. Not for me. So after that, we had Rusev and Lana in the locker room having a conversation in Russian. And Tyler Breeze walked in and called Cassius Ohno Uggo, which I guess is gay feminine talk for ugly. That may have just been my interpretation, though. I'm not sure what the actual correct translation would be, nor am I going to take the time to look it up. But yeah, that was the gist of the segment. Tyler wanted to be buds with Rusev. Rusev did not. Neither did Lana. But she did tell Rusev to crush Ohno. So we'll see about that. I think I read somewhere, didn't Cassius Ohno get released in the middle of this feud? Do we even get to see the actual payoff? It's a good question. I'm interested to see if they actually have a proper finish to that feud, or if they just drop it entirely and never bring it up again. You know what I can't wait for them to drop? Is Dax Harwood's affiliation with Sylvester Lefort. I think that's the guy's name, right? It only took me a month to get it right. What with that thick-ass French accent he has. We had Mojo Rawley here for an interview with the other generic unnamed backstage interviewer. And while Mojo's talking about staying hyped, because, well, that's his thing, you know? He doesn't get hyped. He stays hyped. Yeah, well, as he's letting us know about that, here come Dawson Harwood and Sylvester Lefort. Or Scott Harwood, whatever his fucking name was at the time. And they're trying to recruit Mojo into their little clan of Legionnaires because Lefort can pay him a lot of money, apparently. Meanwhile, Mojo's trying to stir up tension by insinuating that Lefort's been stiffing Dawson on paychecks. I have no idea how he would have acquired this knowledge, but Dawson didn't dispute it. So maybe that split is coming sooner rather than later, which would be good. Because I think we can all agree collectively, FTR / The Revival, much better than Dawson teaming with Sylvester Lefort. Now, I did like at the end of the promo, when Mojo told Dawson and Lefort he's hyped. They were both utterly confused by the use of this Gen Z term. So they both look at each other and go, hyped? Is that French? I thought it was a cool line. So then Aiden English sang for a couple minutes before boring us to death with his wrestling. I would give you a proper review of the singing portion, but, you know, that fast forward function is very tempting at various points in these programs. I can verify he wanted about 90 seconds with the director's cut, which is still the second worst finish on this program, now next to the Page Turner. And I'll just spare you the rant and reiterate everything I've said about this gimmick from the moment it debuted. It's awful. It's turned the channel bad. But for whatever reason, the NXT crowd digs it. So I don't know what to tell you. Different strokes for different folks, I guess. Thankfully, that was only a couple minutes of airtime, so we could bring out Cesaro for what I would probably call the real highlight of this week's program. And of course, the guy's plainly a heel when he's being presented on camera. So, what should the crowd chant? But, push Cesaro. Yeah. Very effective heat magnet. And I have to admit, while I have absolutely no memory of this ever happening, I'm kind of low-key digging the whole Cesaro-Byron Saxton feud, where Cesaro's just out there being a dirtbag and bullying Saxton around for literally no reason, just because it's fun and Byron's an easy target because he's such a gullible goofball. I get that's probably not the intent. I know I'm supposed to probably hate Cesaro for being an asshole, but it's impossible when the target is such easy pickings. So, this week, Cesaro wants to apologize to Byron for putting his hands on him the other week. He says it got heated, got out of control, and to show his gratitude, he will apologize to Byron in 5 different languages, which he does, promptly. And then he tries to get Byron to do the We the People shtick, which Byron was not really on board with. So you'll never guess what happened. Well, as expected, Cesaro beat him up again and laid him out like an idiot. And for those saying, well, Cesaro had no business putting his hands on Byron Saxton again, that was just uncalled for. Well, normally I would agree with you. However, when Byron Saxton voluntarily leaves the commentary booth to go over and shake Cesaro's hand willingly, I'm sorry to inform you, he got what was coming to him. Cesaro played him like a fucking fiddle, and Byron Saxton, the idiot commentator, fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. So yeah, I do not sympathize with him. He was just being stupid. And again, somehow I believe this is all being designed to advance the beef with him and Regal, who was conspicuous by his absence this week. Where was he? I have no clue. Perhaps he was watching the monitor in the back and said, nah, I bailed this idiot Byron out last time. He's on his own this week. So we'll see how that feud develops. So far, I'm very much impressed with manipulative bully Claudio Castagnoli. Hey, you know where this gimmick would have worked great? AEW. Just throwing it out there. And you know what's so awesome about it? He doesn't even have to try to be an outrageous prick. All he has to do is push people around who can't fight back, and you're like, it's totally believable. Makes you really want to see a babyface run in and be the ultimate savior of the day. Imagine that. It's almost like they were doing professional wrestling angles or something. So then we come back from break. They now have Tom Phillips filling in for Byron. And they spent approximately 20 seconds grieving over the situation. Folks, it's a very unfortunate situation that just happened to Byron Saxton a few minutes ago. Wish it didn't happen. That kind of stuff should never happen to a ring announcer. I mean, they're not trained fighters. There's nothing they can do. So hopefully that never happens again. But anyway, we have more wrestling. Here comes Tyson Kidd. On with the show. Hell yeah. Yeah, that grieving period was rightfully short-lived. And that took us to Tyson Kidd versus Leo Kruger, which was story advancement for the Kruger-Zane feud more than anything. They shot an angle where Kruger jumped Zane in the locker room last week. I believe it was last week. Which is weird. Didn't they just establish on this show that Cesaro wanted Kruger to take out Zane as a favor? So was the attack on Zane last week coincidence? Or did Cesaro see that videotape and want Kruger to finish the job or something? Some seemed out of whack there. I don't think they put those tapes in order. Wouldn't it have made more sense for Cesaro to put the hit job out on Sammy first? Then you have Kruger lay out Sammy in the back? Not the other way around? Maybe I'm overthinking it. I mean, I was already tired when I sat down to watch the show anyway, so my brain was already fried. But anyway, they do the match. It's a match. Kruger worked over Kidd's surgically repaired knee for the heat. They kept referring to it as such, so that's how I will refer to it as. I do remember Tyson Kidd going through a series of rough health complications. Wasn't he basically forced into early retirement because of all the pent-up injuries? Can't remember what it all was, but I mean, he ended up quietly phasing out as an in-ring performer before not too long. Sucks too, because he was a hell of an athlete from what I remember. I mean, Vince was never going to push him because of the size thing, but I remember Tyson Kidd being a pretty big deal in WWE at one point. Not as a main eventer or anything, but the internet fans really took to him. I mean, what he did here with Kruger wasn't anything blow away. Just sort of fighting from underneath, selling the knee. Of course, the big spot at the end was Sammy running a distraction on Kruger while he had Tyson in the sharpshooter. So, like a fucking moron, Leo Kruger just lets go of the hold, and he turns his back long enough so Tyson Kidd can roll him up and pin him. It's the most paint-by-numbers distraction finish in the book, and it never gets any less stupid. But WWE was notorious for these kinds of bad finishes, where the guy has the match in control until he voluntarily stops beating ass to look at the guy on the rampway from 15 feet away, who, mind you, is not even trying to do anything or run interference. So yeah, dumb finish. And apparently this was Sammy's revenge after having been blindsided by Leo Kruger in the locker room the other week. He distracted him in a match so he can cost him a win. A match with nothing on the line. Boy, that Sami Zayn showed him. Let me tell you. Looks like Leo's not getting that real American spot after all, is he? Shame, shame. But with that, we arrive at the main event. For the NXT Championship, Adrian Neville challenging Bo Dallas. And by the time they even rang the bell to start this thing, remove the ring intros, and they really only had about 7 or 8 minutes left in programming. So they were only going to be able to fit in so much in that short window. I don't think a single person at home watching actually thought they were doing a title switch here. This was all more about story advancement. So in a way, you were almost kind of just waiting to see what the finish was. And then screw everything else, basically. Not to say it wasn't good up until the finishing sequence. It was just kind of unmemorable. You know, they basically had the story where Bo kept getting outclassed early on by all of Adrian's offense. So, you know, every time he would try to take a powder on the floor, Neville would keep taking the fight to him and not give him a lot of leeway. They eventually had Bo cut off Neville after a turnbuckle distraction spot. Bo ripped off the padding, and then the ref would avert his attention long enough so Bo could sort of get a cheap shot in. And as Bo's working him over, he goes up and misses a diving knee drop, so Neville can start making the comeback. Big corkscrew dive out to the floor, where his knees came right down on top of Bo's head. I wrote Concussion City in big text font. And, well, then we get the finish. As Neville tries to set up Bo for the red arrow, Bo rolls out to the floor, which allows for Neville to do a big cross-body dive and take him out. And while they're both selling, the ref does the dramatic 10 count. And as he reaches 10, Neville is able to beat the count. But again, since it's a count-out win, Bo keeps the title. And, of course, that's a classic heat finish because, you know, when the fans weren't smartened up all the way, you know, they would do stuff like this back in the day and get the initial pop from the fans, thinking the babyface just won the title, and they would take it away from them by announcing the title can only change hands via pinfall or submission. And then they would get stiffed and they all boo. I mean, here I think the fans knew what was going on, so they immediately booed as soon as Neville rolled back in the ring and broke the count. Obviously, though, doesn't spell the end of the program. I mean, we'll have plenty more to branch out as we see this feud develop on TV. But for a starter pack, give the people a little taste of the Dallas Neville title feud. It did its job. Definitely not as hot as the Zayn-Dallas feud was, which, well, they've definitely taken a massive detour from that. But it's all about that slow burn build of working Zayn back into the title equation from the bottom up. And it is just that, watching it happen in real time, slow and burning. So while he's preoccupied with Leo Kruger and or Cesaro, the title program right now is going to be Dallas and Neville. That'll be a big factor as we head into January. Didn't really make for an exciting program overall, especially with that lackluster count-out finish. But I like what they're doing to advance the feud along. I love this stuff with Cesaro right now. The introduction to the feud with Sammy, while they're also addressing William Regal and keeping that going on. You know, I talk about it all the time with these shows. They're about an hour long, 45 minutes if you remove the infomercials. They're not always going to be great from week to week, especially in the taping schedule, but they're always advancing things along, and more importantly, they're giving you a reason to come back and watch every week. It's the kind of episodic television that's really missing from SmackDown these days, outside any potential bloodline drama, just because everything else on the show bores you to tears and never makes you want to come back to see more. It's sad, but it's kind of the cold, hard truth. And it shows more and more as I go back and see these old classic NXT shows from the black and gold days. Not everything's going to be my cup of tea, but at least they're putting in a concerted effort to build stars and give people incentive to care. And it really counts for something. So, winding up this show here. Thanks everybody for tuning in as always. And again, make sure you comment, subscribe, and like the show for me. And you can come back and check us out on Friday for the continuation of our Retro Classic Series review. And at some point this month, I was planning on doing a celebratory end of the year special podcast. Not really sure how I want to do that yet. But I did that the last couple of years on the channel where I would do like a top 15 or top 20 matches of the year. Just kind of give my overall consensus on what I thought about wrestling in the year. So I might do one of those again. Sum up some of the big stories, the big happenings, and go from there. This year in particular, it was pretty eventful for me. Went through a lot of ups and downs with wrestling this year, but I mean, it was the year where I officially kind of just gave up on AEW. Well, at least for the time being. It's not set in stone, but they're really not doing anything to draw my attention in at this point. And now that Punk's back with WWE, what else is there? Kind of the sad state of affairs, but yeah. We'll talk about more about that later on. So, thanks everybody, and take care. Peace out.